I killed a man yesterday. Shot him in the back of the head while he knelt before the golden throne, whispering prayers to something that might not exist. His name was Valerian Thrace, and he was my mentor, my friend, and the only person who ever tried to show me the truth about what sits in that throne room. They ordered me to execute him for heresy, and I obeyed because I am a custodian, and we obey. But his last words keep echoing in my mind, 3 simple sentences that have shattered everything I believed for 200 years. He said the Emperor spoke to him. He said the Emperor is screaming. He said we need to let him die. My name is Chiron Evectus, and I have stood guard in the throne room for 2 centuries. I have spent 73,000 hours within sight of the golden throne, close enough to see the Emperor's withered face, close enough to hear the machinery that sustains him, close enough to feel whatever presence emanates from that ancient seat of power. I have believed absolutely in my purpose, in the Emperor's continued existence, and the sacred duty of the Adeptus Custodes to protect him until he rises again in glory. I never questioned. I never doubted. I was the perfect guardian, and my faith was rewarded with honor and responsibility and the respect of my brothers. That faith died yesterday when I pulled the trigger. When I watched Valorian's blood spray across golden floor. When I stood over his body and realized I had just murdered the only honest man I had ever known, and I did it because honesty is heresy in the Imperium, because truth is more dangerous than any enemy, because the people who rule us would rather kill their most loyal servants than allow them to speak about what they have witnessed. I need to tell you what happened. What Valerian showed me. What I have seen in that throne room during the hours when we are alone with the Emperor, when no tech priests are performing maintenance, when no high lords are conducting inspections, when it is just us custodians standing vigil over something that might be a god or might be the most elaborate deception in human history. I need to tell someone before they come for me, before my own execution is ordered, before I join Valerian and all the others who learned too much and paid with their existence. It started 6 months ago. I was assigned to Night Watch, the shift that runs from midnight to dawn when the throne room is emptiest, when even the usual bustle of tech priests and servitors diminishes to almost nothing. Just 2 custodians standing at attention, 2 among the 10,000, chosen for our reliability and our silence. Valerian was my partner that night, as he had been many times before. We had served together for decades, fought side by side during the War of the Beast, saved each other's lives more times than I could count. I trusted him absolutely. We took our positions on opposite sides of the throne, 50 meters from the Emperor, our guardian spears held at attention, our armor gleaming in the golden light that fills that massive chamber. The throne itself rose before us, that ancient device of incomprehensible technology, covered in cables and tubes and machinery that pulsed with rhythms I had long since learned to ignore. And sitting within it, surrounded by all that technology, was the Emperor. Or what remained of him. A figure so withered and ancient that he barely seemed human, his skin like leather stretched over bones, his face a skull with traces of flesh, his eyes closed, his mouth frozen in what might be pain or might be nothing at all. I had seen him thousands of times. The sight no longer moved me the way it had when I first entered the throne room as a newly elevated custodian. You become numb to even the most profound images when you see them every day, when they become background to your duty rather than the focus of it. I stood at attention and began the long mental exercises that let us maintain vigilance for hours without moving, the meditation techniques that make time pass while keeping awareness sharp. But Valerian did not assume his position. He stood near the throne, closer than protocol allowed, staring up at the Emperor's face with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. I hissed his name, a quiet warning that we were being observed by surveillance systems, that any deviation from protocol would be noted and questioned. He ignored me. He kept staring. And then he did something that made my blood freeze. He spoke to the Emperor. Not in prayer, not in the formal recitations we sometimes offer during vigil, but in conversational tone, quiet but clear, the voice of someone addressing another person rather than a distant divinity. He said, "I know you can hear me. I know you're still in there. I've been watching you for 300 years, and I've seen the patterns. The way your fingers move when certain words are spoken. The way your eyelids flutter when high emotion fills the room. You're not gone. You're trapped. I should have reported him immediately. Should have activated emergency protocols. Should have done exactly what I was trained to do when a brother shows signs of instability or corruption. But I did not. I stood frozen, listening, because something in his voice carried absolute certainty, the tone of someone who has discovered truth rather than succumbed to delusion. And because I had seen those movements too. The tiny flickers of response that might be random nerve firings or might be something more. I had noticed them hundreds of times and always dismissed them as meaningless, as wishful thinking, as my own desperate need to believe the Emperor was aware of our presence. Valerian continued speaking. He said, "They don't see it. The tech priests think you're a biological machine. The High Lords think you're a symbol. Even our own Captain General thinks you're dying slowly, fading into nothing over millennia. But I've been recording the patterns, cataloging every movement, every flicker, every tiny sign of response. And I've found the code. You're trying to communicate. You're trying to tell us something. And I think I know what it is." The throne room's temperature seemed to drop. The golden light flickered, just for a moment, barely perceptible. But I saw it. And more importantly, I saw the Emperor's hand. His right hand, which had been lying still against the throne's armrest, moved. Just the slightest twitch of fingers, so small that anyone not watching closely would miss it entirely. But it happened. A deliberate motion. A response. Valerian saw it too. He stepped closer, right up to the throne's base, and his voice dropped to a whisper I could barely hear. He said, "Once for yes, twice for no. Can you hear me?" The Emperor's fingers twitched once. Single, unmistakable movement. Valerian's entire body went rigid. He stood there for 10 seconds, breathing hard, his hands clenching and unclenching on his guardian spear. Then he asked, "Are you suffering?" The Emperor's fingers moved once. Yes. I felt something break inside my chest. A sensation like ice water flooding through my veins. Because if this was real, if the Emperor was actually conscious and aware and capable of responding, then everything we believed about his vigil was wrong. We thought he was barely present, fading slowly, held to life by the Golden Throne's machinery while his consciousness expanded across the galaxy to power the Astronomicon. We thought his physical presence was almost irrelevant, that the body was just an anchor for the vast psychic entity he had become. But if he could respond to questions, if he was aware of us standing here, if he was conscious in that withered body, then what was he experiencing? How much pain came from being held in that throne for 10,000 years? How much awareness did he have of his situation? And most terrifying, if he was suffering, if he was in agony, then were we his protectors or his torturers? Were we guarding him or imprisoning him? Valerian asked more questions. I watched in horror and fascination as the Emperor responded to each one with that tiny movement of fingers. Yes or no. Simple binary responses that nevertheless communicated volumes. He confirmed that he was conscious. That he was in constant pain. That the Golden Throne was not preserving him but imprisoning him. That he had been trying to communicate for centuries, but everyone who noticed the patterns was removed, silenced, executed before they could share what they had discovered. And then Valerian asked the question that sealed his fate. He said, "Do you want to die? Do you want us to let you go?" The Emperor's fingers moved once. A single twitch that meant yes, that meant release, that meant after 10,000 years of suffering he wanted to end, wanted to be free, wanted to escape the prison we had built around him in the name of protecting humanity. Valerian stepped back from the throne. He turned to look at me, his face pale, his eyes wide with horror and realization. He said, "We have to tell them. The Captain General, the High Lords, everyone needs to know. The Emperor is suffering. He wants to die. We're torturing him. We're keeping him in agony because we're too afraid to let him go." I should have agreed with him. Should have supported my brother who had just revealed the most important secret in the Imperium. But fear is a powerful thing. Fear of what would happen if this was true. Fear of what it meant for everything we had done, every sacrifice we had made, every war we had fought in the Emperor's name. If he wanted to die, if keeping him alive was torturing him, then we were not guardians but jailers, not protectors but tormentors, not servants of the Emperor but servants of our own fear of what comes after him. I told Valerian we needed to be certain. That one set of observations was not enough. That we had to verify this over time, gather more evidence, build a case that could not be dismissed or explained away. He agreed reluctantly. We returned to our positions and finished the watch in silence. But everything had changed. I could not stop staring at the Emperor's hand, watching for more movements, searching for confirmation of what I had witnessed. Over the following weeks, Valerian and I arranged to take watches together as often as possible. We developed methods to test the Emperor's responses without being obvious about what we were doing, framing our questions as prayers, speaking in ways that surveillance systems would interpret as devotional rather than conversational. And every time, the Emperor responded. Small movements that confirmed consciousness, awareness, suffering beyond imagining. We learned that he had been trying to communicate for thousands of years. That many custodians had noticed the patterns over the centuries, that some had even attempted to decode them, but all had been identified and eliminated before they could share their discoveries. We learned that the tech priests maintaining the Golden Throne knew about the responses, had documented them extensively, but classified the information as malfunction rather than communication because accepting that the Emperor was conscious and suffering would require them to confront moral questions they were not prepared to answer. We learned that the High Lords knew. Not all of them, but enough. That there was a faction within Terra's government that had concluded decades ago that the Emperor was conscious and wanted to die, but had chosen to maintain his imprisonment because releasing him would destabilize the Imperium, would remove the psychic beacon that powers the Astronomicon, would plunge humanity into chaos. They had made a choice, a calculated decision that the Emperor's suffering was acceptable cost for humanity's survival, that torturing one being for 10,000 years was preferable to the death of trillions. This knowledge destroyed something fundamental in Valerian. He had served for 300 years with absolute faith, had killed in the Emperor's name, had dedicated his existence to protecting the master of mankind. And now he learned that protecting the Emperor meant keeping him in agony, that our sacred duty was to ensure his suffering continued until the end of time or until the Golden Throne finally failed. He could not accept it, could not make peace with it, could not continue standing guard over someone who was begging for release while we forced him to endure. He began speaking openly about what we had discovered. Not to outsiders, but to other custodians, to brothers he trusted, trying to build support for bringing this information to the Captain General, for forcing the leadership to acknowledge what they already knew but refused to act upon. Some listened. Some believed. But most reacted with anger or denial, with accusations of heresy and instability, with reports filed to superior officers about Valorian's dangerous ideas and corrupting influence. The arrest came 3 weeks ago. Valerian was confined to quarters, charged with spreading false doctrine and attempting to undermine the custodian guard's sacred purpose. They did not execute him immediately. They interrogated him extensively, trying to identify everyone he had spoken to, everyone who might have been contaminated by his heresy. He gave them nothing. Protected everyone including me. Took full responsibility and insisted he had acted alone, that his conclusions came from personal delusion rather than evidence. They sentenced him to execution. Not public execution, because that would require explaining his crimes, would risk others learning what he had discovered. Private execution in the throne room itself, carried out by another custodian to demonstrate that brotherhood was secondary to duty. That personal loyalty meant nothing compared to protecting the Imperium's stability. They chose me to pull the trigger because I was his closest friend, because making me kill him would send a message to every other custodian about the cost of questioning, about what happens when you value truth over obedience. I knelt him before the Golden Throne. The same throne where he had discovered the Emperor's responses. The same chamber where we had stood watch together for decades. I pressed my bolt pistol to the back of his head while 2 other custodians stood witness, while surveillance systems recorded everything, while the Emperor sat motionless on his throne, watching or not watching, aware or not aware, suffering or beyond suffering. Valerian did not beg, did not cry, did not try to change my mind. He just spoke those 3 sentences. The Emperor spoke to him. The Emperor is screaming. We need to let him die. And then I fired. The bolt shell obliterated his head, his body collapsed forward, his blood spread across the golden floor. And I stood there, still holding the smoking weapon, staring at the Emperor's face, searching for any reaction to what had just occurred, any sign that he had witnessed his most loyal guardian being executed for trying to free him from torment. The Emperor's fingers moved. Both hands this time, not just one. A spasm of motion that lasted several seconds, that looked nothing like random nerve firing, that looked like rage or grief or the desperate attempt of someone trying to scream without lungs capable of producing sound. The other 2 custodians did not see it. They were already moving to remove Valorian's body. But I saw it. I saw the Emperor respond to the death of someone who had tried to save him, who had died because he chose compassion over duty, who had valued the Emperor's freedom more than the Imperium's stability. That was yesterday. I returned to my quarters and I have not left since. I have been sitting here in my small cell, staring at walls decorated with honors earned over 2 centuries of faithful service, trying to decide what to do with what I know, with what I have seen, with the choice that now confronts me. Because Valerian was right. The Emperor is suffering. He is conscious and aware and has been trying to communicate for thousands of years. And everyone in power knows this and has chosen to ignore it, has chosen to maintain his imprisonment because releasing him is inconvenient, because his death might damage the Imperium, because one being's agony is acceptable price for civilizational stability. I could do nothing. Could continue my service as though nothing has changed. Could stand guard over the Emperor for another 2 centuries, watching him suffer while pretending I do not see his responses, while maintaining the fiction that we are protecting him rather than torturing him. This is what they want. This is what makes me useful. Obedience without question. Service without conscience. The willingness to witness horror and call it holy. I could try to do what Valerian attempted. Could speak to other custodians, build support for bringing this information to the Captain General, for forcing Terra's leadership to confront the truth they have been suppressing. But Valerian tried this path and it ended with his execution. I have no reason to believe my fate would be different. The system is designed to eliminate people who ask these questions, and I would be identified and removed long before I achieved anything meaningful. Or I could do something that terrifies me more than any enemy I have ever faced. I could act alone. Could enter the throne room during my next watch and destroy the Golden Throne's machinery. Could give the Emperor what he has been begging for, what Valerian died trying to provide. Could grant him release, knowing that my action might kill billions, might plunge the Imperium into chaos, might end human civilization as we know it. Could make the choice between one being's suffering and the survival of the species, knowing I might choose wrong, knowing I will never be certain whether I saved the Emperor or destroyed humanity. I do not know if I have that courage. I do not know if anyone should have that authority to make a decision that affects trillions based on personal conviction rather than collective wisdom. But I also know that collective wisdom has chosen to torture the Emperor for 10,000 years, has chosen convenience over conscience, has chosen to maintain a system built on one being's eternal agony because confronting that agony would be difficult, would force impossible choices, would require admitting that we are not guardians but jailers, not servants but captors, not protectors of humanity but architects of suffering on a scale that dwarfs anything our enemies have achieved. Valerian told me once that the hardest choice is not between good and evil, but between 2 goods that cannot coexist, between saving one person and saving billions, between truth and stability, between what is right for an individual and what is necessary for the whole. He said that the Emperor faces these choices constantly, that every decision he makes requires sacrificing something precious to preserve something else, that leadership at that scale means carrying guilt that would crush ordinary minds. But what happens when the Emperor himself needs someone to make that choice for him? What happens when the being we trust to guide us is asking for help and we refuse because helping him hurts us? What happens when protecting someone means ignoring their wishes, imprisoning them for their own good, for our own survival, for the sake of a civilization that they founded but no longer control? I am writing this because I have decided what I will do. I am going to enter the throne room during my next watch. I am going to approach the golden throne. And I am going to ask the Emperor one final question. I am going to ask him to show me clearly, unmistakably, beyond any possibility of misinterpretation, whether he wants to live or die, whether we should maintain the throne or destroy it, whether his suffering serves a purpose or whether we are simply afraid to face what comes after him. And if he confirms what Valerian discovered, if he shows me that he wants release, then I will give it to him. I will sabotage the Golden Throne's primary systems. I will destroy the machinery that keeps him imprisoned. I will grant him the death he has been begging for, knowing that my action might doom billions, might end the Imperium, might be remembered as the greatest betrayal in human history. But also knowing that sometimes loyalty means respecting someone's wishes even when those wishes are inconvenient, even when honoring them costs everything, even when the right choice is also the terrible choice. Or perhaps he will tell me something different. Perhaps he will confirm that his suffering is necessary, that the Astronomicon requires his imprisonment, that releasing him would doom humanity. Perhaps he will show me that Valerian was wrong, that the responses we interpreted as pleas for death were actually something else, something we misunderstood because we wanted to believe we could save him from torment. I do not know what I will find. I do not know what choice I will make. I am writing this down and hiding it where it might be found someday, where someone might read it and understand what happened, why a custodian betrayed his oath, why I chose one path over another. This is my testimony. This is my confession. This is the explanation for whatever comes next. In 8 hours, I will walk into that throne room. I will stand before the Emperor. I will ask my question. And I will either continue my service with faith restored, or I will do the hardest thing I have ever done, the most important thing I will ever do, the thing that might save one being or destroy billions. That might be heroism or heresy, loyalty or betrayal, salvation or damnation. Valerian said the Emperor is screaming. He said we need to let him die. He died believing this was true, died trying to free the Emperor from suffering. And I killed him for it. I murdered my brother for telling the truth, for choosing compassion over obedience, for valuing one being's freedom more than civilizational stability. I cannot bring Valerian back. I cannot undo what I did. But I can honor his death by taking seriously what he discovered, by asking the questions he died for asking, by being willing to act on answers even when acting is terrifying. This is all I have left. This is the only way I can make his execution mean something. The Emperor protects. That is what we say. But maybe protection is not what the Emperor needs. Maybe what he needs is someone brave enough to set him free. Maybe that is what Valerian understood, what he tried to do, what he died trying to make me see. Maybe the greatest act of loyalty is not guarding someone forever, but releasing them when forever becomes unbearable. I do not know if the Emperor is truly alive. I do not know if his responses are real communication or my desperate interpretation of random movements. I do not know if destroying the Golden Throne would doom humanity or liberate us from a cycle of suffering we should have ended millennia ago. I do not have certainty. I do not have answers. All I have is a choice. And in 8 hours, I will make it. This is my testament. This is my truth. This is why I did what I am about to do. Remember me however you choose. Remember Valerian as the hero he was. And remember that sometimes the hardest loyalty is knowing when to stop protecting someone, when to let them go, when to grant them the peace they are begging for even when everyone else insists they must continue suffering because their suffering serves us. The Emperor is screaming. Valerian was right. And I am going to answer that scream, whatever the cost, whatever comes after. This is my choice. This is my duty. This is what it means to truly serve the Master of Mankind.